Hello, in this video I will show you how to use opal clay to achieve smooth surfaces. I will also teach you how I finish the surface. Working with opal clay can be difficult. Hopefully my tutorial will give you some ideas of how to make it easier and achieve results you like. I hope you enjoy this video. My name is Jan Montarsi from Gembox Polymer Clay Designs. Here are some of the tools you're going to need. Tiles, sandpaper, a blade, a brush, a small cutter, and oval cutter set from Sculpey. I'm using these colors in this along with the opal: white, graphite clay, and translucent. You will need some bacon bond as well as Sculpey gloss glaze. I will be using some cardstock, some hamburger patty papers or parchment paper, and plastic deli sheets. You also need a little bit of paper towels with some alcohol and a spray water bottle. So much for sitting outside on my deck trying to do the voiceover for this video. It's too noisy, so I'm going inside. Back in the day, we used to use playing cards to keep track of the thickness of our sheets. But I am using a 150 Atlas. Remember, pasta machine settings are different on every machine, even within brand. So just get close. Condition your opal clay on the thickest setting of your pasta machine, the translucent clay on about a 3, and the white clay on a 5. You can see how lumpy the opal clay is rolled out on your pasta machine. The flakes in the opal clay create the lumps. There's no way around it. And if you sand them later, you'll just expose raw edges of flakes. Put your opal sheet that's on the thickest setting on top of your number 3 setting of the translucent clay. You can cut a rectangle. Mine is about 3.5 by 5 inches long. Trim away the excess of your translucent sheet, and your sheet should now look like this: opal on one side and then translucent on the opposite side. Roll your stack sheet through the thickest setting on your pasta machine to stretch it out a little longer. Then you can cut it in half and stack in the same order with the opal on top of the translucent. So it should go translucent, opal, translucent, opal. The second time you cut and before you stacked, you can add a little smudge of different colors of mica powders. Look for the mica powders that are iridescent in pink, blue, and green, like the shadows that are in an opal. If you decide to add mica powders, go very sparingly. You only want to add a hint of color and keep them sandwiched between the layers. Then roll your sheet back through the pasta machine on the thickest setting again. You could go down 1 or 2 settings if you would like. I usually work on the thickest setting so I have more to sand. There's 2 reasons I layer the clay the way I do. The first reason is to have a smooth, thin sheet of translucent on the top layer of the opal clay. This traps all the particles inside. The second reason, having those extra layers of translucent in between from stacking, causes more depth to the piece. Those are the spaces where your mica powder would show, deep inside the clay. Now your clay sheet has been cut and restacked for the second time with alternating layers, with your translucent on the top and your opal clay on the bottom. After your second cut and stack, roll your opal sheet through the thickest setting or setting number 1 on your pasta machine. to enlarge it. You could go a little thinner, but if you go too thin, that will defeat the purpose of the layers. First, trim away any rough edges from your opal and translucent stacked sheet. Smooth your translucent and opal sheet, opal side down onto the white clay. I know my top layer still looks bumpy, but this is the translucent side, and we will take care of the bumps later. Remember, the translucent's purpose is to trap the opal flakes below, so keeping it thin will still retain your opal effect. Unless you want a truly translucent effect like these earrings, backing your translucent clays, such as opal clay, with white clay, what happens is the light goes through the translucent and reflects off the color behind it. And if it's white, your pieces will be brighter. If you use a dark color or scrap, your finished pieces will be dull and dark. If you've never burnished clay before, this is a very important skill to learn. It smooths and refines the surface of your clay, and multiple burnishings throughout your creation process can really refine the surface of your clay to the point you don't need to sand. If you see these earrings that are in my previous video, you will see how smooth they are. These were never sand, or there's no finish on them. To properly burnish, use a hamburger patty paper or a very fine piece of parchment paper. Your paper needs to be smooth. Your clay can never be smoother than your parchment paper. I see people use copy paper quite often. Copy paper is not a good option. It actually presses into the clay and can leave fibers in the surface and can also pull clay off when you lift the sheet. There are plenty types of burnishing tools that you can purchase that are flat on the bottom that you slide around on the clay on top of the sheet of paper, but a folded up piece of cardstock also works well. Burnishing is pushing the clay surface smooth underneath the paper. You want to reposition your paper every so often. You may also need to grab a new sheet of patty paper. If you get wrinkles, do not reuse the same sheet. Another item I do not recommend is a stainless steel soap for burnishing. The curved surface creates ridges and does not smoothen your clay flat. And when used to burnish something like a kaleidoscope cane, you get a high amount of distortion in the pattern. You can see my 6 burnished cane slices come together precisely. These kaleidoscope cane pictures are from 2- and 3-day in-person workshops I teach. If you have a group that's interested in a workshop, have them contact me on Facebook. Back to burnishing. Once you think you're done burnishing, when you peel your paper off, do not pull up. Peel back across the surface. That way you're not lifting clay particles straight up. When it's all done and burnished and perfectly smooth, and you're happy with your sheet, then you're ready to finish your projects. If you have a piece of opal flake that has worked its way to the surface, do not pull it out of the clay surface. Use a needle tool to press it into the surface, down below the surface, and then smooth and re-burnish. All that burnishing is going to really adhere your clay sheet to your work surface. Use a stiff blade to slide underneath it to release it from the surface. I usually keep my clay sheets at this point on a plastic deli sheet and try not to ever touch the surface. I really like the Sculpey graduated cutter sets. They come in different shapes, and having the different sizes close together in size allows you to make a domed form as well as a frame. I will show you the frame later and briefly discuss it, but we'll make an actual tutorial at another time. And whether you're using a circle or an oval or any other shape, in this video I am using the second largest cutter so that I can have the largest cutter for my frame. Lightly set your cutter on the surface, but do not press in. You're just marking an area to cut away to use for your first opal. Cut away an area just larger than your cutter, leaving some pointed tabs around the perimeter. Make sure your piece is flawlessly smooth. You may need to re-burnish it. At this time would be the time to do it. Place your clay sheet translucent side up on a piece of parchment paper or copy paper to work on. Place your cutter upside down in the area you want to capture. We will be making a hollow dome form. Lightly press your cutter into the clay surface. You want to attach it, but you do not want to cut all the way through. The reason why we had it on paper was so it didn't stick. Flip your clay over and look at the white side. Make sure it's well attached all the way around the edge of the cutter, the dull side of the cutter. You can see that it's well attached. Now we're going to make a hollow dome form, which will make your jewelry very light. The first thing you want to do so that your clay doesn't slide around, pull the little tabs that you left around the perimeter up to the outside of the cutter and press them to the metal cutter. This will help stabilize your clay in position. Next, flip over your cutter and use your fingertip to massage and stroke the clay from the edge of the cutter to the center of the clay sheet, creating a dome. Repeated smoothing in small steps is what you want to do. You will quickly get the clay stretched up into the cutter, creating a dome inside the cutter. Take your time with this step, allowing the warmth of your hand and slow, short movements to make sure your dome is formed evenly. Check from both sides. If your clay is sticky, you may need to use a little cornstarch on your fingertip. When you're stroking your clay, work from the edge to the center, from all directions of the perimeter of the cutter. Now that you have a perfectly shaped domed cabochon, flip your cutter over onto a clean tile. Press slightly to attach. Then use something like an acrylic block to press hard down to the tile. You're not cutting it, but you want it really secured to the tile. The goal here is to trap air inside the dome and seal the edge to the tile all the way around. The next step is to peel the tabs off the side of the cutter and press them down to the tile. Make sure you press the whole perimeter of the clay that's on the outside of the cutter to the tile. This will secure your dome in place. If your perimeter of clay is pressed tightly to the tile, your cutter should release quite easily, but do it slow. Flip your cutter over to the sharp side and place it precisely on your oval form and cut completely to the tile. When you're all the way cut to the tile, hold your cutter in place and remove the excess clay around the cutter. Remove your cutter gently and reveal your perfectly shaped hollow domed form that is attached to your tile. trapping the air inside. At this point, you will bake your piece at normal baking temperatures for your clay. Be sure to check your cabochon from all angles to make sure it's perfectly even. You can always stroke it just a little bit on the surface to reshape, but it's not always the best outcome. And make sure you don't release it from the tile. This series of tutorial photos was from quite a while ago. I do not have all of them, so I have to remake a second video showing you how to create a frame for your domed cabochon, but I will attempt to give you the gist of it here. I am using a texture sponge and a piece of graphite pearl clay. You'll need a piece large enough to cut a back plate for your pendant, as well as several frame pieces and a tab to make a bail hanger. The first thing you want to do is texture your clay. Run it through the pasta machine with a texture sponge misted with water several times on the same side. This will thin your clay out. I would probably start at a 3 or a 4. Take into account that each time you pass your clay through the pasta machine on the same setting with the sponge texture, it will get ever so slightly thinner. Attach your clay sheet to a clean tile, textured side up, using your sponge to press it smooth to the tile. Replace your sponge on top of the clay sheet. Then use a cutter one size above the cutter you used for your hollow dome form to cut out a base plate sheet that's attached to the tile and bake it. This will leave a textured frilly edge, and leave it because it will help you put it together more precisely later on. After your cabochon has baked and while your back plate is baking, sand your cabochon. Start by putting it on a piece of wet dry sandpaper face up on your table with a little bit of water and slide it around on the sandpaper. This will remove any flaky pieces around the edge. If there are any flakes of opal hanging out of the edge, use scissors to trim them off or use the edge of the cabochon against some sandpaper. I usually start with 400 grit sandpaper and then move up through 600, 800, 1000, or even higher if I'm going to machine buff. Sand through all the levels of the sandpaper evenly on the face of the cabochon, going through the levels one by one for a perfectly smooth cabochon. You can see what it will look like while it's wet once you add glaze to it. This is the back side of the baked back plate, and then this is the front side, the side you will see. So there's no need for sanding on this piece. But what you want to do is make sure the back side of your cabochon is sanded perfectly smooth and there's no ridge that you could see left by the cutter. This will also make your cabochon slightly smaller in diameter. Prepping for glazing your opal. Tear a piece of paper towel just the same size as your tile. Cut a little hole in the center smaller than your cabochon. Press a scrap clay through it to the tile. This will be a base to hold your cabochons level and above the surface so the glaze will drip off. Once you have it good and secure and perfectly level, then it's time to glaze. I use Sculpey Gloss Glaze. It's compatible with polymer clay. The first thing you want to do is spray some alcohol on a piece of paper towel and wipe your cabochon down very well. Make sure you get all finger oils off of it and that you allow it to dry. Your glaze should be a slightly runny consistency. It should run off the brush but not be like water. If it's too thick, put some in a separate container and add a drop of water. You want it to flow, but you don't want it to run off of your cabochon. Put a generous amount of your glaze on the cabochon. Use your brush to move it all across the surface to make sure all areas are covered, and put a little excess on the top in the middle. Allow it to run and drip off the edge. Do not rebrush or you will leave marks. After a minute or two, check the edge. If there's any excess buildup, use a drinking straw to blow off the excess onto the paper towel. Use a clean brush to reach underneath the cabochon to get any drips. Check it shortly after to see if you need to catch the drips. At this point, when you're happy, let it fully dry, and that means at least 24 hours. It will be dry in a few minutes, but it will not be fully cured for at least 24 hours. And if you touch it, you may leave a fingerprint or a dull spot. Here is the finished cabochon and the back plate. Allowing it to dry the full time is best. And it is okay to bake water-based glazes. Allows the glaze to fully cool before touching it. It will get hot and sticky during the baking process, but if you leave it alone and it cools down, it will be rock hard once again. You may want to tent it so the oven doesn't get any dust in the glaze. Now it's time to attach the hollow dome to the back plate. You can use liquid clay and bake your piece again, but you could also easily use a little tiny bit of super glue. You want to get it nicely centered on the oval back plate so that we can finish the front frame. Here are my finished cabochons. And what made the pink ones pink was not color added into the opal clay. It is a very thin layer of pink laid over top of the layer of white. The pink is reflecting the light from the back of the translucent clay back through it. That's why you're seeing the nice color. This is where my old tutorial pictures ended. I lost the other ones, but I will describe how to make the frame and the tab for the bail. So here we go. As I said before, add a thin layer of bacon bond and bake your piece again after positioning your cabochon on the back plate, period. Alternatively, use super glue to glue it in place, which to me is the better option. Just let your glue fully dry before you go further. With your leftover sheet of textured clay that matches your back plate, cut out 2 shapes of the largest size, one larger than you used for your cabochon, on a piece of cardstock, not a tile. This will create the frilly edge around the perimeter, and it will be the same size as your back plate. Then take the cutter that you used to cut your cabochon without the texture sponge to cut a straight edge inside, and cut out the interior of the shape to make a frame. Cut 2 or 3 of these shapes. It's very hard to use 2 cutters and to cut an equal donut repeatedly, or a donut with sides that are the same all around the perimeter. Doing it this way gives you multiple options of pieces to select that will most likely match. With your cabochon facing you, glued to the back plate, apply a thin layer of bacon bond around the frame of the cabochon. Make sure you get a little bit up onto the side of the cabochon, but not higher than the thickness of your frame clay. Now you want to take your 3 frames that you've cut out with the 2 cutters, and they're going to be thin circles or ovals, and cut them all in half. If it's the oval, cut it in half so you have 2 letter D shapes. The reason I cut them in half and make multiples, that gives you a better chance of having pieces that match each other in thickness and width. Position your 2 half donut frames around the perimeter of the cabochon, making sure you have the cut edge at least up under the place where the tab will be to hang your necklace. The other 2 get as close together at the bottom. Use your texture sponge to gently press the frame against the cabochon and the back plate at the same time. You can then use the sponge to go around the edge where your 2 frilled cut-out edges of clay meet, and press the texture sponge to make a seamless look. Take your time and press gently and evenly. Try not to distort the shape of your donut frame clay. To refine the edge, press directly in from the sides against the hard edge of the back plate. That will refine the outside perimeter shape of your pendant. Earlier, when you used your sponge to cut through with your cutter to make the frilly edge, this is where the textures on both edges getting pressed together leave a beautiful, smooth but textured seam. For a tab bail, cut a smaller size oval from your set from the textured clay with the texture sponge so that you have the frilly edge. Set it aside. Add a little bit of bacon bond to the area on the top of the cabochon where you will place it. It may be neater if you apply it to the back of your small oval tab instead of the cabochon and back plate itself. Cut a piece of drinking straw, the skinnier kind, not like McDonald's, and cut it as wide as the tab where it folds over. This will be baked inside. Position one end of the oval tab onto the cabochon about a quarter way of the tab. Then it gets folded up and over the drinking straw and then attached to the back. Use your sponge to press it to keep it in shape and aligned properly. Once you have it perfectly aligned, you can bake this again on a paper towel. The straw will not melt and can easily be removed with needle nose pliers after baking. Place it backside down on the paper towel. Remember, the glaze will be hot and sticky again, so don't touch it when it comes out of the oven until it's fully cooled off. Here are some of my other classes that I have. My snowman class, let's build a snowman. 1 bake, no sanding earrings with finished backs. Some more of my snowmen. And my 3 pendant 3 bail class. All 3 of these classes can be purchased at createalong.com. Go to the tutorial section. I will leave a link in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, not one of my brightest, but I hope you give me a like, a share, and a subscribe. Thank you.